All right. Well, once again, thank you all you InfoBurst users for taking time out of your busy days to join us for the this InfoBurst webinar. We are finding more and more as the community grows that there are users joining InfoBurst teams, using InfoBurst for the first time, that are looking at this solution and a bit overwhelmed. There's lots of features. Oftentimes lots of things they don't know exist in the product that might be useful to their requirements or your organization. So, we want to provide as many of these webinars as we can. And if any of you have any suggestions or requests for a webinar topic, we'd be more than happy to prepare it. If any of you are interested in presenting a use case, if you want to tell your story of how InfoBurst solves some of your report distribution problems, your data problems, we'd welcome that as well. All right, so for today's webinar, we are actually looking at functionality. And these are, what I'll show you today are 5 features that some of you may be aware of, may not be aware of, but they're features that are lesser known in the InfoBurst toolbox, but the users that leverage them really rely on them. And we'll be doing a lot of these because there are lots of lesser known features in the product that I'd like to expose you to. So look for more of these features you didn't know you needed webinars in the future. Okay, let's get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Bryan Baca. I'm the manager of product support here at Infosol. Chances are, if you've gone through a trial of InfoBurst, or if you're talking to our team about any support related issue, we've worked together. But there's my email address below. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out there, or on the Infosol help desk at help.infosol.com, and I'll put those addresses up at the end of the presentation. Also, we will be fielding questions at the end. If questions arise during the presentation, throw them in the chat or the Q&A section, and I'll make sure to get all those questions addressed as well. All right, so 5 features. Let's start with number 1, query bursting. So most of you came to use InfoBurst because you had a need to burst and deliver a Webby report or a Crystal report from BusinessObjects or a Tableau workbook or a Power BI report. And that's really where InfoBurst was founded, on the bursting, publishing, and delivery of BI reports. Over the years, we had requests for that same functionality for a direct database query or a stored procedure or a view, right? Where the idea is there's data in the organization that you would like to refresh or burst and then deliver to users where that data does not reside in any sort of BI report or universe, that sort of thing. So very simply, you can add a query to a burst, you can refresh it or burst it, say by state, as we'll do in a moment, I think region, and then deliver the results to any InfoBurst destination in various formats. So let me show you what that looks like. All right, let's see here. So we're gonna go like this. So we'll start with the query. And here I have a database connection, and against that connection, I have a number of queries. And I have a query here that returns me sales records by region. It's got a parameter for region. So I don't want to just refresh this query and send it to users. I actually want to burst and create unique outputs for each region's data. So I'm going to run this just to test it. And one of the regions is Asia. And we can run that and validate, yep, it's bringing back data. So this is the query we'd like to put in a burst, publish it, and deliver it. All right, so let's go new burst. Actually, before we do this, I want to show you, this is going to be a data-driven burst, meaning we have a query with a parameter, and we would like to feed that parameter with a list of values from someplace else. We're not going to hard code the values in the burst. You would probably go get them from another query, or an Excel workbook. In this case, I have a multi-column list, right? This is a simple table that you can build in InfoBurst to do things like manage lists of values for prompts and filters, email addresses, and this one just has 2 basic columns. So to keep it simple, we will feed in these 3 region values to the query parameter. And then for one of the 2 deliveries, we will send each resulting file to these email recipients. All right, so now let's create our burst. We'll call this database reburst. We'll save that, and then we'll go and add our query. So here I can select the database connection, and we have listed on the right all of our queries, and I want this one, the by region. And we'll add that. So that's a query in a burst. A lot of folks, when I introduced this feature for the first time, didn't know they could do this. All right, so first we need to address the parameter region. We're going to point to the multi-column list, specifically the region column. So here's my region email list that we just looked at, and the column we want is region. Now, a little trick here. When you're in here, when you're assigning a data source to a parameter or a filter, and the data source contains multiple columns of information, if the first column is the target column, meaning in this case that the column with the region values, you don't need to put in that. You don't need to define the column. InfoBurst will always use the first column. I do it because it's a good practice when there are multiple columns and maybe region is the third column. I'll encourage users to put this in just because, you know, InfoBurst now does need to know which column to use. So I'll leave region there. And we'll say, okay. So that's the bursting, right? We're feeding the query parameter with a list of values from a data source. And then we will we'll set up 2 deliveries here. All right. Let's go, the first one, we will send this as to email as Excel. All right. So we're bursting on region, and you saw in the data source that we had 3 regions and 3 corresponding email addresses. So what we're going to do here is what's called a data-driven email delivery, right? Where we're going to take the bursting value, the region, and look it up at runtime, at delivery time, and get back the email address where each region is going to a different recipient. So there's our email destination. And for recipient, we leave this selected as email address, and we're going to drive the recipient list using a macro. So I go in here to my macro builder, and on the left here we can see the macro data context. This is the data context in which we're working, where we have a region filter or region parameter. That's this one. Equals, by the way, denotes what's called a parameter macro, right? That represents the parameter and the values we're giving it. And then this macro here is what's called an extra column macro. Extra column macros are denoted by the % symbol. And typically, if you select a macro, it's going to tell you all that stuff down on the description. So that means that because we assigned the data source to the region parameter, InfoBurst now knows about any other columns in the source, including here, the email column. And that is the column I would like to target for the data-driven email delivery. So I will simply add that as the recipient, and then at runtime, InfoBurst will work out which address gets which region report. So we'll save that. And just checking my notes. Actually, you know what? I want to show you one more thing. Right. So think about what we're doing here. We're going to run a query. We're going to get back a raw result, columns and rows. Nothing fancy. It's not a formatted report. But there are actually. Let's talk about the formats that are supported here. So consumable, right? We'd probably want to send a user an Excel file, maybe HTML. But there also, you can see here, we can take a query and send it as data to Tableau. We can send it to Power BI. We can create a SharePoint list from it. Lots of things we can do here. But most often I see users delivering their queries as Excel. And with Excel, we have this concept of extensions. So think of an extension as a way to format an Excel file that we've generated from a source. And this could also be Excel from a Webby report, that sort of thing. So here under Add Extension, you can see a list of the extensions. We can filter. We can assign row level grouping. Auto fit the data. This is a very common one, right? Because that data comes out in a raw format. It's not auto fit. That way we get a nice consumable Excel file. And then we can freeze panes on the horizontal or the vertical, and we can even delete columns if necessary. So I'm going to add two extensions here. I want to format this Excel file by adding a column level filter. Then I'll add another extension, and we will do an auto fit. Right? So simple formatting of database data in Excel. So let's save that. I'm going to run this in real time so you can see what that looks like. This goes very fast. We're just running a small query. And that should be done. So let's pull up our email client here. Okay, so this is the email that resulted from that burst. I've got all three mailboxes that you saw in the data source are in this mail client. And you can see here, Bryan, got just the Asia slice of that query data, right? And there you can see, actually, if we go back here, this is, and I'll show you this in just a moment, but this is a raw Excel file that I produced from this same data, and you can see just columns and rows, right? So now, using the extensions, I got an Excel file that we can, scroll back up, we can filter, right? And then the data is auto fit, or the columns are auto fit to the data. So I am seeing more and more users leverage this where they just need a quick way to get at data in the organization, intelligently burst it out to users in various formats. And there are other things you can do with query data. This is just the Excel example. Let me close that. What I've done ahead of time is delivered this same query as HTML to the InfoBurst portal. So if we come in here, you can see an example of even more formatting. So we have the ability, when the format is HTML, to apply our own custom CSS to that HTML to give it a theme, a look and a feel. So here is the result of that, right? So it's the same data. I've just come in, InfoBurst provides us a CSS template, and we're not going to get into this topic today, but there is documentation on our help desk that explains this. But basically, you can go in and define simple CSS. In this case, I did a color scheme on the rows. And this is the result. So that was one CSS file. Here was another, right? So you can really, with the combination of Excel extensions, the HTML formatting, deliver something that looks decent and is usable to end users where it didn't come from a Webby report or a Tableau workbook. And this, by the way, I could send in an email, right? The user could get what you see right there in the body of the message, not an Excel attachment or a CSV attachment or something like that, but you can send something that looks nice like that in the email body. Okay. So in that same vein, let's now shift over and look at our second topic, which is Excel bursting. This feature was introduced fairly recently. I want to say end of last year. That would be 2021.4. So it's a newer feature. But it follows this same thing where users were looking to burst queries. We then had users saying, can we burst an Excel file? Well, think about that for a moment, right? An Excel file is just a static file with data in it. But yes, if I have let's say I have a raw Excel file. Let me see if I've got one open here. That's this one, right? So here I have just raw Excel. And I don't want to send this to recipients as is. I want to burst it. I want to break it up and produce a unique Excel file for, in this case, each region. So in essence, we can burst a static Excel file like we do a Webby report or a Tableau workbook or a query, right? So I'm going to close this, and then we'll go back. Actually, sorry, I didn't even go through my my bullet points there, right? So we're going to burst the workbook. We can, as I said, send that resulting those workbooks out. You know, they've been personalized per user, just like we did with the query example. And then, just as I showed you with the query to Excel, we can take the output of the Excel bursting and apply extensions to that. So we can take an unformatted Excel, burst it, apply formatting to it, and deliver. So let's go back into InfoBurst. All right, so let's do this. Here's the Excel file. I've added it to InfoBurst. Just a reminder, if you're creating a new burst from a document, you can either go new burst, or there's a little shortcut here. It's a little hyperlink. It'll just create a burst automatically. It puts the document in a burst for you, gives it a default name, and you can always come in and override that name if you want. But it's just a quick way to put a document in a burst. So there's our Excel file in a burst. And so here's where the magic happens. If we go into filters, we're going to say add filter, and InfoBurst knows about every column in the Excel worksheet. And so we're simply going to select the region column as our filter column. And here we have some options. We need to supply filter values. I could supply values from a data source like a query or another Excel file, or I could type the values in. But here we're going to use what's called report variable. This simply means we're going to use whatever values exist in that column. We're getting the list of values from, in this case, the Excel file. That's all that means. Okay, so that's how we're filtering. And then, right, we'll just deliver this to a network folder. So we'll just say Excel network folder. I do always name my deliveries. And our destination is network folder, but this could be any destination we support. Any of those can receive this Excel file. And we're going to put this in here and in here. Okay. And we are going to come over here and we're going to add extensions to that static Excel file. So we'll do the same thing. We're going to add an auto filter. We'll add auto fit. Save that. And we'll save that. And let's run that. And this also goes very fast because we're not calling into a BI reporting platform to refresh or publish. We're doing all that ourselves. Okay, so if we come over here, we can see the result. So there we have that static Excel file that's been burst by region. And there's our resulting region Excel workbooks. And then within that, we have our Excel extension formatting with our filters and our autofit. Okay, I'm going to pause right there. I think some questions have come in related to these topics, and I think maybe it's good to address those while we're fresh on the topic. So let's see. Joseph says, can you reference multiple email addresses per region using this method, but move all email addresses except one to CC so they are the same email? The short answer, Joseph, is yes. There's a slightly longer answer where I would need to show you how to construct your data source to achieve this, right? Basically, you would have one column for, let's say, to email, and that can have multiple recipients. So it could be just one address or multiple addresses, semicolon delimited, I think, semicolon. So you can have multiple addresses in the to, and that's what you'd assign to the to recipient. Then you'd set up another recipient that is CC, and for that one, you'd reference a CC column. So yes, it's possible. Keith asked, oh, Keith, hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Keith asks, for Excel bursting, if an Excel file is tied to a data source like Power BI, will InfoBurst refresh? No, nope. That is a very interesting idea, but this is just pick up a file from a folder, burst it, and deliver it. But as always, if you see features and you have ideas for enhancements, please head over to our user influence forum, give us all the detail you can, and we're happy to consider all of your ideas. Kirk Braden, or by use of condition for to and CC. No, actually, in this specific scenario, Kirk, we are leveraging the extra column macro, which does not support conditions. And again, we don't have time to cover it here today, but there's yet another email recipient option, which is data source, where that source can be the same data source, but then you can add parameters. So yes, you can do that, Kirk. No, not in the way I just showed you. But if any of you want to have a deeper discussion about these things, or get guidance on how to achieve what you're looking to do, just drop us a ticket in the help desk. We'll be happy to walk you through it, or get on a Teams meeting and show you how it's done. All right, let's close that. Well, you know, sometimes I wish we could just have an open discussion on these Zoom meetings. Maybe we'll look into that for the next one. Okay, let's see, that's Excel bursting. All right, let's move on to the next topic. Number 3, single report parallel processing. So the concept behind parallel processing, oops. I thought I had more bullet points than that. Right, so let me talk first about the concept of parallel processing. So in a burst, I can have multiple items. We call them items because they could be so many different things. I can put Webby, Tableau, Power BI, database query, Excel, SharePoint list, all these things I can put in a burst and do stuff with them. So we call them generically items. And when I have multiple items in a burst, let's say I have 2 Webby reports, right? I put those in a burst, I set them up to do bursting, and whatever the delivery is, it doesn't matter. And when that burst executes either manually or on a schedule, by default, those 2 items, in this case Webby reports, are going to run sequentially, one at a time. So let's just say each Webby report takes 30 minutes to process. And by process, I mean the amount of time it takes the platform to refresh it and publish the output. Let's say that's 30 minutes per report. Well, that means our burst runtime is 1 hour, okay? Let's say you have a requirement that says, I need to run a burst and deliver both of these reports within 30 minutes, okay? That's where parallel processing comes in. So within the burst, and I'll show it to you in a moment, there is a burst level setting called generation mode, and it is set to sequential by default. If I were to set that same burst to parallel and execute it, both Webby documents are going to kick off at the same time. They each take 30 minutes to run. Therefore, I've cut the runtime of the burst in half, 30 minutes. That's a very simple example of how I would leverage parallel processing. And we've seen customers do some really elaborate things. I saw a customer once that they had a customer invoicing report that they ran for like 200,000 customers. And if they ran it sequentially, I think they figured out it would take about 2 days. Right, that's just how long it takes for the platform to iterate through all the combinations of values and publishing. And they had a requirement to take 2 days and compress it down to 4 hours. So they, using this method, but in a very elaborate way, they had multiple bursts, multiple instances, all running in the same time. And they were able to compress that down to the required time period using this parallel processing method. So I wanted you to, for those of you that didn't know, be aware of what parallel processing is, what it can do. But then there's this concept that so I just talked to you about the standard use case that says multiple items, different items. But let's say you have a requirement that says, I have a single report. And in the example I'll show you, I'm going to run it for 8 states, right? I'm going to burst for 8 states. And let's just say that that one takes an hour to run. I want to cut the runtime down of that report. Well, how can I do that? It's one report. You can leverage the same process for a single report. And let me show it to you. I think it'll make more sense if we build the use case. Okay, let's go here. So I have a document. Oh, wait, it's this one right here. Yeah, this is already set up for us. So what I have here is a single Webby document. And to keep things simple, we are going to burst it on a parameter for 8 state values. This is a multi-pass, which means we're bursting, which means we're going to refresh once for each state. So 8 refreshes, 8 exports, right? Let's pretend that this is a long-running report. I actually couldn't find one in our test environment. I think in this mode, this report, including the refreshing and the exporting, takes about 20 seconds to run. So let's run it, and we'll look at the 20-second example, and then I'll show you how we can cut that in half. And we will pretend that 20 seconds is maybe like 4 hours or something. And this as okay, that should not be taking so. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Okay, that environment has stopped itself, my business objects environment. So let me think about how we can do this another way. Let's do this. Let's see if we can pull this off. I might have another document that we can use for this. Let's try this one. Actually, we'll just get rid of you. Actually, let's go like this. Okay, that was just a template. All right, let's get rid of that. All right, this one is also a state report, and I think it will accept the same values. So let's do this. Why is it locked? Okay. All right, so there we have our Webby report parameter 8 values. I'm just going to add a delivery from a template, and then we'll try this again. So we're just going to send this out to a network folder. Let's run it and see what it does. This should take around 20 seconds. We'll see. But the point of this is, as you'll see in a moment, that you can actually add multiple instances of the same item or document to a burst, run each one for a different set of values, and then set that burst to parallel, right, where you're running the same report multiple times, different sets of values, therefore reducing the runtime, or subsets of your total list. So let's see, 2833. So yeah, that one took about 20 seconds end to end, right? Where the bulk of the processing is business objects, right? We log on, we open, we set parameter, refresh, export, and repeat. 99% of the burst runtime is going to be within that, where we're delegating to business objects. So let me show you now how you would split this and run it in parallel. So the first thing I'm going to do, just so we can see it, we're going to call this report. Let's call this state report instance 1. I'll copy that. Okay. So we're not renaming the document in InfoBurst. We're labeling its instance in the burst, right? So now what we'll do, actually, let me do this. One moment. Just grab a notepad here. Okay. All right. So what we'll do is a few things. Number one, I'm going to come in here, and there's my list of values. And again, we're keeping it simple. We've just got the values hard-coded here. More likely, you're going to be retrieving these lists of values from a source like a query or Excel. And you can, say I have a query and I want to pull back a list of states, then you might put a parameter on the query that allows you to pull back a subset of that list for use in this scenario. And again, if you need some guidance on that, just let us know. We're happy to guide you. So what I'm going to do is cut this list in half. So the first instance is going to run for the first 4 state values. I'll save that. Oops, nope, I don't want to do that. And then what we'll do is add a second instance of the same document. So that is my MVP document. So I'll come over here. It's this one. I'm going to rename that instance. So we'll call it state report instance 2. And I'll come over here to its parameter, and I will put in the second or the last 4 state values from our initial test. I am doing a multi-pass. It's interesting that I don't have a save there. I'm going to add the delivery. It's just a template. We'll do that. And let's go like this. Check everything, make sure it's good. Yeah, see, I need to get rid of those. Okay, that looks better. All right, let's run that. So the first time, oh, I'm sorry, almost forgot the key piece here. Come over to the Burst tab, generation mode under processing options. I'm going to switch this to parallel and save, right? So again, now when I run the Burst, both Webby reports will kick off simultaneously and run. So we can see that happening here. There we see the simultaneous logons and opens, all the refreshes and exports happening in parallel. And in theory, we should cut this in half to 10 seconds. Felt like longer than 10 seconds. Let's see. 52. That's about right. Cut it about in half. So you would obviously see the tangible result of this in a more real world scenario where you had a long running report. So, and any of you can try this. Just take any report you have. Maybe it's something that runs 5 or 10 minutes. Do what you just saw here, and you should see that runtime cut about in half. And after you can see how you could scale that up to really speed up the processing of more complex reports. Let me just check for questions on this topic. Sajid, I'll come back to that question at the end. I will address that. Okay, so that is parallel processing of a single report. All right, the next two are pretty basic, but they are features that people seem to be surprised by when I show it to them and that they do find useful. So there we go. Let's go through the bullet points. So it is possible in the InfoBurst user interface to favorite a folder, and I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. So you can add a folder to a list of your personal favorites, right? And I've seen environments that have hundreds and thousands of folders. So the ability to favorite a folder and then quickly access it really saves a lot of time. And then it's possible to assign a home favorite. So among your favorite folders, you can go in and say, this is my home favorite, which means when you log into InfoBurst, you will be taken to that favorite folder every time. So if you're deep into a project and you have to click into 8 subfolders to get to it, each day when you log in, it's going to take you right to that folder. You don't have to go digging around. You can change the favorites, add and remove them. You can change your home favorite. I think it's all pretty self-explanatory once you're in the user interface. So let's go up here to manage. So let me come in here. So here in my demo folder, and this is my folder for today, my webinar folder, and you can see that I have favorited it, right? So you go into the target folder. Now let's toggle it off, and you will see this little gray star. Click it, turns orange. Now it is a favorite folder. Let me do that with a few more folders. Let me go, let's do maybe this one. I'll favorite the Tableau folder. Maybe we'll come up here and we'll favorite maybe this workflow. We'll do the calendars folder. Let's do that. Okay. So now when I'm up here at the root, manage, I can see my folders are designated by the little orange star, but more importantly, there is a quick navigation menu here. So any favorite you have will be listed here, and then you can jump straight to that folder. So I just jumped straight to our webinar folder today. So you will see, we're in the folder, so it's now removed that as a favorite. Here I want to jump up to calendars. So favorite your folder, then you'll see them in this drop-down favorites list. Now, I also mentioned what I call a home favorite. We don't really have a name for it. So let me go back up to manage. And so if I have a number of favorites and I would like to log on to that home favorite every time I access the UI, just go up to your user profile in the top right. It's got your name and a little person icon. And then here under favorites, you will see a list of your favorites. And you can also remove the favorite here in addition to just unclicking the star in the folder. But just find the folder you want. I want my webinar folder as my home favorite. Click the star there. That is now your home favorite. So I will log out. Say OK. Now when I log back in, I'm taken straight to my demo webinar folder. So that's the concept of a folder favorite and a folder home, or a home favorite folder. Okay. What's our last one here? I've actually forgotten. All right, bulk template assignment. I've actually shown this to a number of users in the past week or so. When I'm watching users go about building bursts and I see that they're manually assigning templates over and over in a burst, I thought, let's advertise this feature because it's kind of a hidden feature and it really saves time in the burst building process. So let's just go through those points. So the idea here is that I have a burst with multiple items, and my intention is to assign a delivery template, the same template, to all items in the burst, right? So if that's my requirement, instead of assigning the template one by one for each item in the burst, I can bulk assign that template. So let's go back to InfoBurst. And I've got one here. So actually, let's start with the template, right? For those of you that don't know, a template is a way to predefine common aspects of a delivery, the destination, and the format. So here I'm delivering to email recipients, just me. My selected format is PDF, right? So the idea of the template is when I go to create a delivery for a burst item, instead of defining this stuff manually, if a template exists that does the same thing, I just need to click a button to assign the template. I don't need to go through that manual process. And I strongly encourage you, especially those administrators out there, really push the use of templates. Not only are they a time saver for users, but they can also save you a lot of hassle down the road, right? So let's just say, what would be a good example here? Well, let's just say you have a common delivery that is used over and over and over again in many bursts, and those deliveries have been created manually. And then the requirement for that delivery changes. The organization says, okay, it has to go to this person instead of that person. Well, now, if I've created everything manually, I have to go burst by burst, delivery by delivery, and make that change. If you get in the habit of using templates, then you create the template once, let users assign that wherever it's required, and then if a change is required, edit the template, and then that change proliferates to wherever that template was used. I have seen countless users struggle with the scenario I just described, where they won't have that problem if they use the template model. All right, so I have my template, and if I come over here to my burst, right here I've got 4 items, and it doesn't matter what the burst item is. I've got a Webby report, a Crystal report, Tableau workbook, Power BI report. That template applies to all of them. I want to send them all as PDF to that recipient. So right here, you see this little pencil icon. It says Manage Items. Click that, and we're given the Burst Items menu. Assign templates last, but I'll show you these others while we're here. So these are all bulk options for the Burst items. So we have the ability to bulk enable and disable items in a burst, right? You might have multiple reports in a burst and you want to disable a few of them, maybe 3, or maybe my requirement is I want to run this one, but I want to disable all of these. And you can do that by selecting each burst item and then clicking enable or disabled and save and repeat, right? Or you can come in here and just select all the documents you want, change their status, apply, so you can do everything in one pass and then come back and enable them, right? So that's what I can do here. Reordering. So this is the order of the items in the burst, and reordering is primarily used for content grouping. So if I'm going to take output from all of these documents and group them into, say, a single PDF, and I want the order in the PDF to be a certain way, I can actually reorder the documents. That's what this is for. But that's not why we're in here. We're actually in here for the assigned template. So I showed you the PDF email template, and what we'd like to do is assign it to all 4 of these documents. So I can just hit my select all button there, hit choose template. There's my PDF email template. We select, and that's it. Now that template has been assigned to all 4 items in this burst in one click. The example I worked with most recently, they had 20 documents and I watched them doing one template after. Actually, it was even worse. They were creating the same delivery manually over and over again. So I educated them about the use of templates. And once they created the template, I showed them that they could bulk assign that template to 20 documents. And that was a real revelation for them. So hopefully that's something that would be useful to you as well. Okay, that was number 5. Right, that was 5 things. We've looked at 5 things. So let's then move on and see what else we have here. Right, so as I said at the top, if you've got users, coworkers that couldn't attend today, this webinar is recorded, and we will have this posted both to the website you see there, events.infosol.com, and the Infosol Help Desk webinar forum later today at the latest. So you can share that around if they'd like to see demonstrations of these features. I think the system will send you a message when that recording is posted. So let's talk about the next InfoBurst webinar. The next InfoBurst webinar will be a version release webinar. This will be an overview of the next InfoBurst version, which is 2022.4. We've said this for the last few webinar teasers, but this is another big release, lots of features. And in fact, it's funny, just to tell you all that I had a request yesterday where we had a user back on build 240. They're a little late to getting updated, but they've now planning to get current with InfoBurst, and they're talking to us about how to do that. And they wanted an overview of all the features and enhancements that have come since we went to 64-bit. So 2022.1, which was January of 2021, to the current version. And I knew it was a lot of features, but I wasn't sure, so I went and did a count to prepare for the presentation. And in fact, it's approximately 100 features of enhancements have been made in the last 7 versions. So it's been a very busy two years for us. We really want to get these features out to our users, show you how to use them, and hopefully they're adding value in your environment. So let's talk about 2022.4. The big feature, well, there are several, is cloud drive support. So in this version, we will be supporting all 4 of the major cloud drives: Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, and Box. This has been something that's been on the roadmap for a little while, and we're happy to finally deliver that. So, and let me talk about what that is, and we'll show examples during the webinar for this version. But this is not just delivery of content to cloud drives. We can also read from cloud drives. So imagine a scenario where you have an Excel file that you are using as a data source to drive report bursting or create hyperfiles or drive a data cache. Whatever you're doing, your data source is Excel, and that Excel file is stored on one of these cloud drives. InfoBurst can go to the drive, read the Excel file, that's where you're storing it, and then use it in InfoBurst. It'd be the same as storing the file on a network folder. So we can deliver 2 cloud drives and read from them, right? Right, so lots of users use SharePoint. Well, everyone that's using SharePoint today is using Office 365 SharePoint or online SharePoint. And Microsoft is in the process. Most of you probably use what's called basic authentication, which means when InfoBurst authenticates, it's a username and password. And Microsoft has been in the process over the last 2 years of informing their users and slowly starting to phase out basic authentication. And so that leaves us with what's called application level or app only authentication, where it's called modern authentication is another term, where instead of users authenticating, it is the application that is making the authentication request, in this case to Azure AD, which has worked for a lot of you. But there are some out there who are still looking for that per user access to Power BI and SharePoint. And so we've, in 2020.4, we're adding what's called delegated OAuth authentication. It is application level access, but then the actual authentication into SharePoint and Power BI, or the restrictions, are per user. So the user will be able to authenticate to SharePoint as them, or Power BI, or actually it's to Microsoft. And then whenever they interact with these platforms, they are interacting as them, as the user. So that support is coming as well. But again, going back to my first point, if you use SharePoint and you're still using basic authentication with a username and password, be thinking about transitioning to one of these other authentication methods, because at some point Microsoft is going to turn that off for you and those platforms are going to stop working. All of this will be documented. Well, the current app-only authentication method is documented in the help desk, and with this version, you're going to get documentation on the OAuth as well. Right, so I spelled that wrong. In 2022.3, we introduced, I'm going to fix it because I can't take that. Let's do that. It's called Discover. In 2022.3, we introduced Discover, which is the ability to create reports against the InfoBurst environment. In 2022.4, you will have the ability to schedule these reports and deliver them just like you would a BI document, right? So you could have a report that you've created that shows aborted bursts for the week, and then every Monday you could set up to deliver that to recipients as an Excel file. So scheduling and delivering of Discover reports is coming in this version. And then finally, because I see Alan on the line, hey Al, we're introducing a feature called Memo. This one's a bit abstract, and I think we're going to be able to really demonstrate what it can do when we give this this webinar. But the basic idea is, because we saw more and more users, right? Think about what InfoBurst does. InfoBurst delivers BI content. And we would see users that were using InfoBurst to deliver email to people where they weren't delivering any BI content. They were just using the power of InfoBurst to email and do other things, but they were playing tricks to avoid actually delivering content because their only goal was to use InfoBurst as basically a smart bulk mailer. And so we saw this. We were shown a really cool demonstration of what a user had come up with to achieve this with InfoBurst. And we thought, let's incorporate that into the product and make it easier to do. So we've actually created a brand new object called a memo. And the basic idea is that I might have imagine a database table, and I've got a column with recipients, and then I've got other columns with other information I'd like to include in that email. You'll be able to add that query to a memo, I almost said burst, and then use those extra columns to do things like put stuff in the message field, customize the subject line, where InfoBurst is now driving mail from a database table where there's no BI content involved. So that's Memo in a nutshell, and we'll show you that in the next webinar, which should be here. So this date, Thursday, December 1st, is the date of the 2022.4 webinar, and it is our target date for the general release of 2022.4. And I'm going to go ahead and make this offer to everyone. If you're interested in testing any of the features that you just saw, we went into beta early for this version. So if you'd like to test cloud drives, the delegated authentication to SharePoint or Memo, drop us a line on the help desk, and we'll talk about getting you a copy of the beta that you could put in your test environment and test drive some of these features. So yeah, that date is for both the webinar and the general release of that version. You can register for webinars if you aren't already. It's events.infosol.com and just select InfoBurst webinars. And as always, stay in the loop. If you're doing anything, follow the announcements forum at health.infosol.com. That way you'll be notified of critical updates, and then every time we release a version, you'll be notified there as well. We do have a LinkedIn group. Just go to LinkedIn and search InfoBurst, and you'll find a community of users there talking and interacting about InfoBurst. Okay, with that, I will answer any other questions that have come up. And so I want to go back to a question from user Sajid. And he asked this in relation to the bursting of Excel, right? We took an Excel file, we bursted it, and we delivered it. And his question is, can we convert Excel into Tableau data source using InfoBurst? And the answer is yes. Let me switch back over to InfoBurst. Oops, there we go. So if we go back over to, what was it? Was it this one? No. Is that one? That one. Right. So there's my Excel file, Sajid, in a burst. I'm going to add a new delivery. I'll just leave it as network folder, but we actually, no, that's not true. You want to send it as hyper to Tableau. So here I will select Tableau Server, and then format Tableau Hyper. So yes, you can deliver Hyper to Tableau from an Excel workbook. Hope that answers the question. All right, I'm just looking at our Q&A panel. I don't see any more questions. Let me go over and look at our chat. I don't see any chat messages. I am also happy we've got a little bit of time here for those that are still here. If you've got any questions or comments that are not related to the topics I just covered, I'm happy to address those. I'll wait just a moment if anyone has any other things they'd like to talk or ask about. Keith, thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear from you too. We're glad to see our users joining us. And yeah, especially for those admins out there, yeah, we've got a help desk full of documentation that nobody likes to read, because who likes to read documentation? There's lots of videos there. Some users find them, but I find a lot of users struggling, especially new users struggling to really understand what they can do with InfoBurst. So I would advise you to point them at these webinars, because especially in the version release webinars, we will go through and highlight and demonstrate in detail every new feature. So that's kind of their quick reference point to learn how to do something in InfoBurst, right? So please, if you can, promote those webinars in your organization. And they don't have to attend live. They can go watch the recordings. It's all free. Really, we want to see our users well educated. Okay, I don't see any more questions or comments. So with that, we'll end the webinar. Once again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy day. It was good to see you all. Hopefully we'll see you on the December 1st webinar. And with that, thank you and have a great day.